Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Sex Advent Calendar, 25 days of sex education all through the month of December. I am delighted to be doing this video with my colleagues, Melissa DiGioia and Tracy Higgins, who are in private practice together at Finding Your Individuality. So Melissa is a certified sexuality education specialist, and Tracy is a licensed professional counselor, and I am thrilled to have them talking to you today about the intersection of sex and intellectual disabilities, which is definitely a topic that does not get covered enough. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to them.
Hi, everyone. I'm glad to be here. Thank you, Bianca, for inviting us. I am Tracy Higgins, and I am a licensed professional therapist who specializes in sexual trauma and more specifically working with individuals with developmental intellectual disabilities. I don't identify as a person with intellectual developmental disabilities. I'm a neurotypical individual, but I had started my career working with people who have intellectual developmental disabilities.
So Tracy and I came together as colleagues working in the field. Me as a certified sexuality educator and Tracy as a licensed professional counselor to support people more interdisciplinarily around their sexuality related needs and desires. So Bianca, how I occupy this space, I am also a neurotypical individual. I do have a hearing impairment, but I'm a neurotypical individual who works in the field of sexuality education and saw individuals in groups that were just not having enough education or support around this work.
I have a definition that Melissa and I often use for intellectual developmental disabilities. People with developmental disabilities often have severe long-term disability that can affect cognitive ability, physical functioning, or both. Developmental disabilities appears before the age of 22 and likely to be lifelong. Sometimes developmental disabilities can stem from genetic or other causes, such as lead exposure, alcohol exposure, etc. An intellectual disability falls under the umbrella of a developmental disability. But intellectual disabilities is disorders that are characterized by a limited mental capacity, difficulty with adaptive behaviors such as managing money, schedules and routines, or social interactions.
When we talk about an umbrella term around intellectual and developmental disabilities, that there's no cookie cutter kind of shape around what people's experience is with living with an intellectual and developmental disability. How a person experiences their life can be very unique and different. So, even though we're using very generalized terms, I think it's important to center each individual and not just solely focus on whatever's written on a piece of paper. In order for individuals to exercise their sexual rights, whether it be understanding their body, living their authentic self in terms of their gender or sexual orientation, or going for a sexual health exam, we must begin by recognizing people with intellectual and developmental disabilities as sexual beings. And that's one of the first things that we wanted to talk about today, is that a person living with an intellectual and developmental disability, that's one aspect of their intersecting identities. Their sexuality is also intersectional as well, a part of who they are as a person. Sexuality is often put on the back burner. And so one of the points that we want to make today is people with intellectual and developmental disabilities have a lot of very different sexuality related needs and desires, and we need to start centering those things. They may be wanting to come to a sense of awareness around their bodies and developing comfort with their bodies and their sexual anatomy, wanting and needing different degrees of intensity around having physical closeness with people. We call that skin hunger in the sexuality field, and navigating personal relationships and understanding relationships and letting others know about what they want and themselves, that self-disclosure. And one of the things I find that young people need a lot of support around is their transformations with puberty. What does puberty look like? How is it experienced? And how do we talk about that with young people? And one way to do so is to ensure that people have access to sexuality education that's medically accurate, age-appropriate, developmentally appropriate, that focuses on things related to what we talked about today, like our body and how do we care for our body, and what are the names and functions of our sexual body parts, just like any other body part we have, and how do we navigate relationships. How do we come to understand who we are as a sexual being in terms of our orientation and our gender identity and how we express our gender in our world. How do we go for sexual health and decision making? How do we actualize it in our everyday life? And those are just some examples. So I'm going to turn it over to Tracy. She's going to talk a little bit about why people with intellectual and developmental disabilities are vulnerable to abuse.
So we're talking about sexuality, we're talking about sexual health, and these are areas of learning that can be very triggering for survivors of abuse. Particularly for survivors of sexual abuse. So, as clinicians, as professionals who are working with people with intellectual developmental disabilities who we know are vulnerable to abuse, we need to put that and consider that in our treatment planning. This is a hard aspect of a person's life to talk about, and I do honor that for some of those. For some of you out there, it may not be easy to hear these statistics, but the reality is that people with intellectual developmental disabilities are at a heightened risk. Research suggests over 90% at some point will have some experience with sexual abuse. People with intellectual developmental disabilities, in their lifespan, they may experience anywhere from 4 to 10 experiences of sexual abuse. I'm always looking for a trauma history. I'm always exploring that because I understand the impact that has on somebody's development and somebody's growth. Why are people high risk for sexual abuse? One of those pieces is just education and skills. Having the skill set to be able to assert themselves in a situation, identify a situation that may be abusive or unhealthy. So as professionals, for those of you who are out there and who are working with people and who are working with people that have learning differences and who are neurodiverse, it's really important that we understand in our treatment planning the impact that this abuse, chronic bullying, discrimination, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, physical abuse, verbal abuse can have on a person's learning.
So our organization is Finding Your Individuality, and we're located in New Jersey. And if you'd like to reach out to us to learn a little bit more about some of the programs that are existing, very limitedly, mind you, some of the programs that are out there, we'd be happy to talk to you.
Well, thank you so much, Melissa and Tracy, for sharing in this conversation with us. I so appreciate the work that you're doing and the expertise that you bring to this field. Thank you for being wonderful allies for the community and for serving them in a very meaningful way. For everyone watching at home, please stay tuned for more videos all through the month. And of course, if you want to find out more information about Finding Your Individuality, we will include links to their page below. Thank you so much and have a great day.